This presentation is a discussion of the vulnerability assessment of Mark Mosley's servers. This presentation is done by Mark Mosley for the ISA 4220 class at Kennesaw State University in the spring 2016 semester. This presentation is done on May 1st, 2016. The vulnerability assessment was done on two servers, a Windows Server 2012 R2 that was at a static IP address of 192.168.6.74, and also a CentOS server, which is a Linux-based server with a static IP address of 192.168.6.75. This is important because having that .6 in the IP address range means that only a computer in that similar range could run these tests against them, and I'll explain that in a minute. The tests were run from a vulnerability pod, and there were multiple pods where we ran the test from that were running the Kali 2.0 operating system. And they had static IP addresses, but because there were multiple pods, they were in the range of 192.168.6.200 to 250. So when I say it's a static IP address of 192.168.6, most computers go .1 for first computer, .2 for the second computer. So if you have it on a local account and it's always bringing down your regular information, your IP address, and it's not hard-coded, then that computer would not be able to see my two servers or Mark Mosley's two servers and be able to run these tests against them. So we had to use a computer that was also on the same subnet as the two servers being tested. The vulnerability assessment software was the Nessus scan. Now, the Nessus scan is a remote software. It was developed in 1998 to provide free use for IT professionals to look for security vulnerabilities, and it avoids any possible errors by not making any presumptions about the software or services running on your server. So it looks for everything. So it will scan all 65,535 ports and specify the vulnerabilities that it detects on those ports, and also the type and version of the software or services running, and if that is the latest and greatest versions. So with the Nessus software, I ran the basic and the advanced scan, and I found that it returned the same information. Now the scans were run on multiple scans were run on Friday, April 22nd, 2016. This was after multiple failed attempts throughout the previous week and a half to run the scans. There were some technical issues with the vulnerability pods that the majority of the class were having, and I continued to have afterwards. The scans run on Friday, April 22nd were used to help secure the server. Fortunately, they did not get all the way secured, as you'll see in this presentation, with the final results being run on Monday, April 25th. There are two types of results that came out. You have the executive view, which just highlights the security vulnerabilities. And you also have the custom view, which provides in-depth detail about each security vulnerability and recommendations to patch, disable, or upgrade the software or service to remove the security vulnerability from your network. The Nessus software rates each security vulnerability and gives it a 0 through 10 vulnerability score according to the CVSS model. If it's 0 to less than 1, it is an information only. It means that these are suggestions given to further harden the service. They're not necessarily needed, but would help to ensure that data is kept available, confidential, and the integrity is protected. A low vulnerability has a vulnerability score of 1 to 3.9, and these are vulnerabilities that are difficult to exploit, or if exploited, the compromise would be minimal to the server. A medium vulnerability, which is where the majority of my vulnerabilities are, with the rest of them being low, are vulnerabilities that exploitations are mitigated by substantial degrees, factors such as auditing, default configurations, or even the difficulty of exploitation, meaning they can be reduced by turning on audit trails to see who does what, changing the default configurations, or that these exploits are hard to do. The next two categories, high and critical, I did not have any of these security vulnerabilities in these two categories. So high is in the 7 to 9.9 range, and this rating is given to vulnerabilities which, if compromised, would compromise the availability, confidentiality, and integrity of the user's data. And a critical 10.0 is for a security vulnerability that can be remotely exploited, and it will lead to the compromise of the system. The assessment findings: there were no operating system security issues. We did have application security issues. There were 3 in the CentOS server, or 3 types. They were in the SSL, the SSH, and the firewall. And in the Windows Server 2012, there were 2. They were in the SSL and the DNS. So the assessment findings, remediation recommendations, and real-world applications. For the SSL, they were both medium vulnerability rankings, both pertaining to the SSL self-sign certificate. The Nessus scanner did not recognize the self-sign certificate. And this recommendation is to purchase or generate a proper certificate. So it's saying that you basically need to purchase a commercially available certificate, because the self-sign certificate cannot be trusted. This costs money, and for a school assignment, spending $75 not practical. For the SSH, we had 1 medium and 2. For the SSL, the real-world applications are when somebody logs into your site and they're going to a secure connection. In certain web browsers, it will give them a warning that while they're using HTTPS, it is not a secure connection, or that the certificate cannot be trusted, and do they want to apply an exception. For the SSH, there's 1 medium and 2 low vulnerabilities dealing with the algorithms for encryption. There were some weak algorithms enabled for SSH. This was because stronger algorithms were not enabled. So the remediation is to remove the weaker algorithms and enable the stronger ones, and I've listed the particular methods there. Real world implications are the weaker the algorithm, the easier it is to break them. So it takes less time, less computer resources, and there's more known vulnerabilities against them. For the firewall, there was one medium vulnerability that had IP forwarding enabled. The remediation is to disable this, and you can disable it with a simple command line prompt that is just one line. This was entered into the firewall, into the IP tables, but it was entered incorrectly, and it wasn't caught until these scans were run, so that's why it's showing up. The real world implications are if you normally operate a service on port 90. Excuse me. And your firewall is set to block all of that traffic that comes in on port 95 because it's an attack. While with IP port forwarding, bad traffic coming in on port 95 that is an attack would automatically be directed to port 90, the regular port, and it would launch an attack against your server. For the Windows Server SSL, once again, the self-signed certificate and purchasing a real-world certificate was a big issue. And it also did not like, the Nessus scanner did not like using SSL. There are known vulnerabilities in using SSL. So it recommends to disable SSL and instead use Transportation Layer Security, TLS, which is a better version of encryption. And that will solve the other two issues, actually the other three issues that you see on the screen. And then for DNS, there was one medium issue. The server's enabled for cache snooping, remote information disclosure. This is recursion information. So basically, if a request comes in that doesn't disable remote cache or remote recursion, people are able to see how often or when the most recent download of a particular website was from the DNS directory. And with this information, they can start building an audit trail of what websites and all of that that the server goes to, and with that information they can do password attacks and network captures to get the login credentials to banks, vendor accounts, and all of that, which could cost companies millions of dollars, depending on how big the company is. So that is actually a relatively easy fix. Once again, it is one command line in the MS-DOS. And then these are the references that I used, and this was to create that chart in the rating scale. Are there any questions?